Hi, I'm Richard, and I'm going to show you how to implement Web Payments SDK using React. We're going to be using a community-created package called React Square Web Payments SDK. We're going to be using Next.js as our React framework since it will let us set up a simple backend to show a full end-to-end experience. Let's start by scaffolding our app using create next app by running npx create-next-app, and we'll name this React Next Web Payments SDK. We'll go ahead and let that install all of our basic dependencies. Now that's done, let's install the extra dependencies we need for adding in Web Payments SDK and Square Node SDK. We can install them using npm install --save, and the package names are React Square Web Payments SDK and Square. One extra dependency we'll need just for Next.js is Next Transpile Modules, because of how React Square Web Payments SDK dynamically loads in the Web Payments SDK. Great, we have all our dependencies, so let's set up our app so we can customize it. First, we're going to update the next.config.js file so we can use our Next Transpile Modules package to let us load things properly. We'll just create a variable here called withtm and import Next Transpile Modules using require and pass in @Square Web SDK and React Square Web Payments SDK. We'll wrap the exports object using withtm and add in an option for experimental, and set a child key ESM externals to loose. Let's save this and go start our dev server now. Open up the terminal and run npm run dev. And now we can open our browser to localhost with port 3000, and we see the Next.js starter app. We'll navigate to the pages folder and open up index.js. This is the main page that loads at our root URL. We can go ahead and delete everything inside the main component and remove the footer. Great. Let's import the SQ Payments form component and add it here. We need to add some props to the component. So let's add in the application ID, location ID, and card tokenization response received props. The application ID and location ID are my own credentials I got from the developer dashboard. Now we can create our card tokenization response received function, which is triggered when we want to process the buyer's payment details, which in this case will be when the Pay Now button is clicked. We'll make this an async function with the parameters token and buyer. For testing things out later, we'll add an alert here that will just alert the token when this function is called. We have the SQ Payments form component configured, we just need to add in payment option components as child components to render our payment form. Let's go ahead and import the credit card input component here and save. You can see that our app hot reloads and we have a credit card form shown in our browser. Let's test it out by entering in a Sandbox test credit card number. You can find these values in our documentation under Sandbox test values. Great, we see it has alerted our token info to us. We got the front end part of this setup, but let's not stop there. We're going to create a simple backend endpoint to process the token that is being generated by our payment form to show a more complete experience. To do this, we're going to use a feature of Next.js that lets us create API endpoints. It's important to note here that although we have all of our code showing in one project, you should remember that what is in the API folder is part of our backend and should only be running on our server. The other files outside of the API folder are what is being sent to a buyer's browser and powering the front-end experience. If you're curious about how this works in Next.js, make sure to check out their documentation, which is linked in the description. We'll start by renaming hello.js to pay.js. Alright, now let's import our dependencies. We'll import client from the Square Node SDK. Next, we'll import random UUID from the Node.js crypto library. Then I'm just going to add in a helper function on the big int type to help with serializing this type into JSON, which we will need for sending our response later. Now we can initialize the Square SDK. We'll destructure the payments API and then create a new instance of client, passing in an object with our access token and setting the environment to Sandbox. We can now replace what is inside this handler. Let's create a conditional to check that the request we're receiving is a post request. Then we'll create a result variable using destructuring and await on payments API.createPayment. We'll pass in an object that has an idempotency key, which we'll just set by calling random UUID. Then we'll pass in our source ID, which we can get from the body of our request. Next, we'll set our amount money and then set the currency to our location's currency, which is USD in this case. And we'll set the amount to 100 for $1. We can go ahead and log these results for debugging and then create our response, setting the status to 200 and sending it as JSON. Great, We have our backend set up, so we just need to go back and refactor our frontend to send the token to this endpoint. We'll go back to the index.js and change our card tokenization response received function. Let's start by creating a response variable, and then we'll assign it by awaiting on fetch. We'll pass in our endpoint URL, which will be /API/pay. Then we can pass in our options object. For our options, we'll set the method to post, add in headers to indicate the content type as application/JSON, and finally, we'll add in our body. For the body, we'll just stringify an object with a key of source ID and set token.token for that. Finally, let's change this alert to send us back the response. Since it will come back as JSON, we'll need to stringify it using await on response.json so it could be printed back neatly for us. Alright, let's test this out again with a test credit card number. Great, we can see our response being alerted to us, and it looks like we have a completed payment. We covered a lot there with setting up the front-end components and getting our props configured, then setting up a simple backend for processing our payment, and finally, we refactored the front-end to send our token to the backend. Now that we have a credit card set up, let's quickly take a look at how we can add another payment method into that same SQ Payments form component. So just below our credit card input component, let's add in a paragraph component just for spacing, and then import our ACH Pay component. We need to set the account holder name prop on it for it to work. We can save and see that we have a new button for ACH. Let's test that out. Again, I'll just enter test credentials since we're in Sandbox, but you can find these in our docs under Sandbox test values. Great, we see that our payment went through, and if we scroll down, we can see that it was a bank account for our source type. So that was pretty easy to add in another payment type, and it was able to use our existing card nonce response received function, and we didn't have to change anything on our backend. That covers getting set up in React using Web Payments SDK. We have links for everything in the description. You can find more info in our docs about handling other payment types, but if there's something else you'd like us to cover, let us know in the comments. Happy coding!